Hello everyone, and welcome back to Breaking on the Daily, where today we don't really have a whole lot of stories, because the debate happened last night, and that was, it was an absolute train wreck for Biden. Now, my opinions on how debates work is, I don't think the actual argumentation or anything of that sort during the debate itself, like the whole 9 yards of going through the entire debate, really matters, because most people aren't going to watch the debate all the way through. I think the most important thing about a debate is how many ads that a political candidate gets out of it. And so, by that standard, I think that Trump won the debate fairly handily. I mean, to start off with, we got the oil comments that Biden made, saying that he was going to transition away from oils, from all oil, all oil, natural gas, that type of thing, rebuffing on his position about, I never said I'd ban fracking. And that's really bad, because the entire Rust Belt pretty much goes away at that point, and Joe Biden needs the Rust Belt, so this is going to be a huge problem later on. And on top of all of that, in my opinion, well, you have a bunch of partisans who are very much pro-Biden who are saying, no, he said he was going to transition away from it, not that he was going to ban it, as if those were functionally distinct. Saying that there will be no new fracking jobs, well, that means that if you're out of a fracking job now in the Rust Belt, or you have a fracking job that's going to end soon, you're not getting a new one. And it means it's going to end soon eventually. And putting yourself down that path is very bad for these oil industry and fracking and all those sorts of workers. It's going to hurt them. Simply not having new jobs to do. So it's not functionally distinct from banning it outright. Essentially, it's a difference of doing it all at once or just putting you down the path to doing that. And I think what these people forget is that people are afraid of literally anything that could potentially threaten their current job. I mean, just look at all of the times that people have argued that technology is going to remove jobs from existence. Right now, we have the exact same thing going on with trucking and, automatic driving trucks. So that people are already complaining about that, saying, oh, no more jobs, because that's always been the case. This is a time-old friggin' thing, and doing it from the government standpoint is even worse. Substantially worse. I think it's actually bad as opposed to technological improvement, which is generally a good thing. But and so when you're saying to the people, well, we're not going to ban it outright, people who have these jobs, you're not saying, oh, we're not going to ban it outright. We're going to ban it eventually, though, but not right now. It's going to come out. So, eventually you're not going to have any more jobs. We're not going to do any new ones, After you do this, 3-year or 4-year contract, no more contracts, because there's just no more work to do. We're not doing any more work. That's going to freak people out, because it turns out that people have more than just the next 5 minutes in their mind. They have more of a long-term perspective on things, particularly when it comes to their career and their job. That goes with most people, at least most intelligent people. And a lot of these workers are very intelligent people. They're good, hardworking, and intelligent people. They're not thinking only about right now. I mean, if they were, they wouldn't be doing what they are doing. I don't imagine they would be, at least. But beyond that, you have a lot of other things where Trump really defended himself very well. He defended his Black Lives Matter comments very well by saying, well, my first interaction was this thing, which is really, really, really bad. The pigs in a blanket fire like bacon with regards to police officers. That's good stuff. Lots of good stuff from Trump last night, I mean. There were a lot of attacks he got through. Hunter Biden was really effective. And something interesting I noticed about the debate, and I'm sure a lot of people noticed this, but some people noticed this, but not a lot of people, surprisingly, is that either Trump was one of the was more reserved and controlled than Biden was, because or only Trump's mic was muted at any point, because almost every single time that Donald Trump would make a good point and that he would trap Biden into not having an actual response, he'd say something like, he'd either scoff or he'd say something like, "That's false." Essentially his version of wrong from Trump. It was super interesting because it seems as though the positions flipped. So from an optical standpoint, it looked like Trump was very reserved, on point. Everything he said was specific. He had a lot of specifics about what he was actually doing, whereas Biden was very vague. I mean, you see this from the Frank Luntz, what was his name? Yeah, I think Frank Luntz. His group said these very things, that Biden was very vague. They said they liked his one-liners more, but, they wanted more specifics and whatnot. And I found that very interesting. Like, their personas almost flipped, though Biden still had his plenty of dementia moments, poor boys, and all of that sort of thing. One thing I noticed when I was actually watching the debate, to be clear, I was mostly listening. I was playing Spelunky in the background, so wasn't really watching. So for me, it seemed as though Biden, when I was watching, his eyes were just bulging. And I notice this more and more often nowadays, is that his eyes just go like this every single time he speaks. It's crazy. Especially when he speaks with, like, in a contentious environment, his eyes just bulge completely. And you saw that a lot in this debate. But yeah, Biden just had nothing. With regard to the Hunter stuff, he either said things which were completely untrue about the DNI and the FBI saying, "Oh no, there was no evidence for this, it was Russian disinformation," when that's already been disproven by both the FBI and the DNI and I think, was it the CIA? No, it was the DOJ. The DOJ also said that this wasn't Russian disinformation. So the intelligence community doesn't think that the Hunter Biden stuff is disinformation. He also talked about how there was no evidence for it back in January. I mean, bringing up stuff back. I think he was confused about what the time frame was, and bringing up January with regard to the impeachment and stuff. An interesting thing, which I haven't seen a lot of people bring up, is the fact that Trump probably knew these emails existed back in January, and back when he made the call to the Ukrainian leader about having an investigation into Biden. So what this has done is essentially retroactively justified literally everything Trump did with regard to what actually got him impeached. And this is something that amazes me to a certain extent. There is now evidence that he knew Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were doing these corrupt dealings in Ukraine and in China. So everything he did was justified. Because remember, the other country that was talked about in terms of getting an investigation into Biden was actually China. It's amazing. And we know he knew about it at that point. So the question arises, of course, why didn't he release it in January? And the reason I think it is because I think Trump already knew that Biden was what the Democratic Party wanted, who they wanted to become their nominee at that point. I mean, most people did. You go back, most people were talking about how, Biden's the guy that the establishment wants and all that. And I don't think he wanted to destroy his campaign, because this story is very much a silver bullet. It is the story that has absolutely decimated his campaign in a lot of ways. I think that there's no recovering from this. And this silver bullet is very valuable, and I don't think he had these sorts of silver bullets against Bernie. Now, I think he'd win against Bernie anyway, because Bernie would lose Florida easily. Like, it wouldn't even be close. He'd lose Florida easily. He'd lose a lot of places just because Bernie is inherently unappealing as being an avowed socialist. The idea that Bernie was more likely to win than Hillary in 2016 and now Biden this time around is just a fantasy world. The fact that he couldn't recover from defending Cuba by just not defending Cuba is telling enough. I mean, that's a lot of the reason why he actually fell apart in the primaries. But to get back to the original point, the reason he didn't release these things in January to vindicate himself of impeachment at that time was likely because if he had, Biden's campaign would have been absolutely decimated. He wouldn't have gotten through the primaries. Imagine if this story came out in January, during the impeachment as a defense from Trump. It would have ended in a complete, like, Joe Biden would have gotten a single delegate. No one would have voted for him because he would have, all of the wind would have gotten out of his sails. And I don't think that the Democratic Party would end up circling the wagons around him. And at that point, either they'd have to resort to a Mike Bloomberg or Pete Buttigieg. And Mike Bloomberg was a disaster of a candidate anyway. And Pete Buttigieg he just wasn't going to win in the general. I mean, he doesn't have the sort of national notoriety that's necessary to actually have the sort of national appeal required to actually gain the presidency. And Biden legitimately was the best choice. He was the best choice out of the candidates. I mean, Bernie wasn't going to win. He's too much of a socialist to do that. Buttigieg has his problems. Mike Bloomberg has his problems. Elizabeth Warren has her problems. All of these candidates had problems that were going to decimate him. And Biden had his problems too, but a lot of them were really under the surface. The Hunter Biden story being one of them. And I don't think they knew that he had this silver bullet and that he had these emails. Because if they did, they wouldn't have put up Biden. I mean, frankly, they just wouldn't, which is why he didn't release them in January. So I find this fascinating. I really do find it fascinating that everything that's coming out right now is vindicating Trump in January. It was truly fascinating. I think that is something that people need to pay more attention to, because obviously this is sort of a dirty politics type of thing, releasing it in October rather than in January. But it shows the strategic acumen of Trump, even though I imagine the whistleblower thing was probably not in his plans, obviously. It shows his strategic acumen, that he held his cards back. He didn't show everything he had back in January. Because now, when Biden's only argument is, well, back in January, no one was saying that there was any evidence for this, it rings hollow. It rings like he can't actually argue against the evidence, and it rings like he is trying to hide himself and trying to say, oh, no, this has been disproven. We haven't, all this evidence that have come out is completely irrelevant, because back in January, when he didn't have this evidence, everyone was saying it was untrue. Yeah. So, Biden's really, really screwed after tonight, or after last night. It's not, I don't even think it's going to be close anymore. Jeez. So, yeah, I think that's all. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm out.